take the Shiva, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva.
Half a mile to the rise, we'll take the Turks by surprise. Keep the trot, hold the line as we wait for the sign. Clear the brow of the hill, keep it steady until we're in range of the guns. Then we'll break into a run.
Forward we'll take the Shiva, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva.
Bayonets flash in the sun, Johnny squint down their guns. Captain Davies gives a yell, we went at 'em like riders fall. Horses run, empty saddles splash with blood. Turkish trenches 50 yards, squadron they led the charge.
Forward we'll take the Shiva, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva. Slouch hat with plumes of flying, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva. Hooves go hell for leather, flying horses clear the trenches, man and beast leap up and over. Man and beast leap up and over. Forward we'll take the Shiva, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva. Slouch hat with plumes of flying, spur up and on like horsemen, ride on through dust and bullets till we take the Shiva. Till we take the Shiva. Till we take the Shiva.
Well, hello, everybody out there. This is Garrett, and you're watching the 11 Bang Bang Reload Show. We're back. We had a bit of a hiccup last week, but we got it all fixed. And to my right here, we have Steve from Trooper Codys and Steve, and He is from the other side of the world.
G'day, how you going from Australia?
And down here on the bottom, we have the Reverend Snapper, which you all know him. This is the Wild Snapper. And today we are here to talk about World War I history and Anzacs. And before we get into it, guys, we're not going to discuss any modern politics that are going on in the world right now. And, you know, I would appreciate it if we kind of keep it out of the chat, too, just because there's as many different opinions about that as there are people fighting it for real life. So let's just take a break from all that for tonight, and let's go back about 110 years and talk about what was going on in the world at that time, especially down under on the other side of the world.
Well, look, if I can make my first comment, I'm sure most Americans know Crocodile Dundee, and I think that was in the 80s when Crocodile Dundee came out. Long before Crocodile Dundee, the Australian troops would say to the Turks, "That's not a knife. This is a knife."
Yeah.
That's the bayonet that the guys used. And that's what, when they didn't have sabres at Beersheba, your wonderful start to this video, that's what those blokes charged the Turks with.
So that was basically their saber then, huh?
They were, because they were mounted infantry, they weren't issued with a sabre. They weren't supposed to have a sabre. They, even in the handbook, they don't, the 1914 handbook says there's no galloping because you have to save your horse. You never do any more than a canter. And the big thing, that's why everyone was so stunned at Beersheba, because they actually did the full gallop. And there's a lot more to it because the horses hadn't had water for so long. The horses were crazy with thirst. They could smell the wells, and the blokes couldn't actually pull their horses up. The horses were out of control.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Before we go into all of that, let's go back and talk about what is an anzac. I'm sure that, I mean, I kind of know because I've done a little study on it over the last few years, but maybe some people in our chat don't even know exactly what anzac is or what it means.
Well, there was a conflict called Gallipoli, which happened in early in the war in the Dardanelles. And in Gallipoli, they wanted the Australians were there, the New Zealanders were there, the British were there, the Scottish were there, the French were there. And it turned out to be, right from day one, a serious disaster. And so the hierarchy in the Dardanelles got together and said they had to come up with a name to describe the forces. They couldn't have great big long names. They wanted something short and punchy for their telegrams. And in the room with them was a New Zealand sergeant. And while they're bickering about whose name will be first, the Australians will be first, the New Zealanders will be first, the sergeant was scribbling down on a piece of paper just the primary letters of who was there. And then it's a famous story, it's in one of my Trooper Codys videos, that he handed a piece of paper to a junior officer, because in those days a lower NCO couldn't approach a more senior officer. It just wasn't the done thing. And when this junior officer looked at the piece of paper, the sergeant had written Anzac, and underneath it he'd written Australian, New Zealand Army Corps. And that got passed to another officer, and a senior up the ranks, and it was decided Anzac, that's it. And that's how they came up with the term Anzacs. And then, because of the horrendous losses at Gallipoli, it was decided that that term that was coined at Gallipoli would be used forever to describe Australian and New Zealand troops, Anzacs.
Yeah.
Good name. It's a good name.
It sticks.
It does.
Let's go into what was it that caused the Anzacs to wind up at Gallipoli? Was this Churchill's idea? I mean, I know they're in Egypt first, but was the plan always to invade Gallipoli there?
So when Australia in 1914, September of 1914, is when they put together the first contingents to go. Australians saw themselves as still British at that time. We still flew primarily the Union Jack, the British flag. And so there was this massive volunteers came forward to go to Europe to fight the Germans. And that was what it was all about. Go to Europe, fight the Germans, save the empire. And the sad thing about that, of course, is that when it comes to the light horse, the Australian light horse, most of the blokes, to be in the light horse, you had to be a great rider. Most of the blokes brought their own horses. How tragic was that? They do their training. They do months of training. They're fully qualified. They get on the boats to go to Europe. They're actually all at sea, heading for Europe. Meantime, Churchill has come up with a plan to attack the Dardanelles and to go up the coast and basically have the Russians come on side to help us and fight the Germans from behind. Unfortunately, Lord Kitchener got involved. He changed the plan dramatically. And so if I'm giving you a Reader's Digest version, Churchill came up with a great plan. Kitchener ruined it. And now the disaster that's the Dardanelles, so many Australians despise Churchill because it was his plan, not knowing the full history, that if that actually had happened how it was supposed to, it would not have been the horrendous disaster that it was.
And for those of you who are watching and might be confused, this is actually a young Churchill. This is World War One. This is not this is Winston Churchill, but he's not prime minister. This is and that what you've just told me is very interesting, because as someone who's just spent the last 3 or 4 years studying this, I was under the impression that it was Churchill's fault, and you have just enlightened me on something that I didn't know, and so there we go. Something new.
So look, just quickly, I'll say, because I tend to get carried away and talk so much, I'm really trying to control myself to stop and let you guys speak. But what you will find is you will find historians who say it was all Churchill's fault, but if you look at that true history of it all, the fact of the things that Kitchener changed, that's the big, all of the different things that he changed, which is far too deep to get into here, but he changed a lot of things that made it a disaster waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it didn't help that if it wasn't already a disastrous plan, they then landed at the wrong place. And that's the other thing. They landed at the wrong place.
My understanding is when they landed at Gallipoli, they had no idea what was beyond those first cliffs. They had no maps. The maps were not correct. Is that what was going on?
Yes, that's all. And really, it's not so much that they didn't have the right map. Well, they didn't have the right maps because that's not where they were supposed to land. They were supposed to land a mile and a half away. And I'm sure anywhere in the world we can look at a set of cliffs and then know that if we were a mile and a half from those cliffs, it might be very easy to climb up. And that pretty much that's what's wrong. They went at night in a whole different area with no aerial observation, no satellites, no clues. They got the wrong maps for the wrong area. They land at night, and as they're going up the beach, the blokes are saying, this cliff isn't supposed to be here. That's primarily what happened.
That's a disaster.
When you go back and you look at the videos, what I see is this is D-Day for America, World War II, but this is what would happen if everything went wrong. You know?
Yeah, that was my first thought.
We're using wooden rowboats instead of the amphibious landing craft that they had. Are they landing under machine gun fire, or is it relatively calm when they land? Do you know?
No, when they first landed, because they landed at such a terrible spot, they had virtually no opposition. So they landed and there's virtually no gunfire because there's nobody there. Because why would you defend a place no troops are ever going to land?
Right.
And really, it all boils down to 2 Turkish officers one a young officer who was with a small group of troops that were at least within running distance of those cliffs. And when the Anzacs first started landing, virtually no opposition, climbing the cliffs, getting further and further inland, they're met by the small group of Turkish soldiers who their officer virtually says, you're just going to die here, shoot and kill as many as you can. And that causes the Australians the Anzacs, that causes them to pause. And that is what gives the Turks enough time to send a message to Mustafa Kemal, who was the senior officer in charge of the whole peninsula. And that he is about 10 hours away. And basically, he then gets his troops instantly on heading that way, thousands of troops now, and they manage to get there in the early hours of the morning. And his address to his troops has gone down in history because he said to all his troops, I don't expect you to we're not going to, I don't expect you to beat the Australians, I expect you to die. That's basically, and he doesn't say all of us are going to die. We're all going to die here, but our dying here will give time for more troops to arrive.
Okay, so for the Turks, this was their Sparta. This was their 300, then, huh?
Could not put it better. Perfect.
Yeah.
So they're there to. And I'll like Snapper. You got any thoughts, Snapper, before we go on?
Those men were some men. Holy cow! The idea of even becoming in the wrong place. You know, we actually do that to this day because sometimes you expect it. If you have some really good fit men, you'll be able to take advantage of the things that they won't think you would take advantage of and gain an upper hand and surprise. But this is thousands and thousands of troops. It's not going to happen. And at the same time, you know, the Turkish, think about how that would have been terrifying on both sides. That would have been a war I'm so glad I didn't have to fight. Yeah, definitely on the fact of those were men, real men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's going on with the light horse at this point? Because the light horse is part of the Anzacs. And that's the one we all talk about. You realize there's several divisions, it's divided into several things. But what is going on with the light horse at this point?
So today, the light horse still exists, but much like many countries, there are no horses in the Australian light horse at all. The Australian light horse is tanks and armoured cars, armoured personnel carriers. That's primarily what the light horse is today in the regular army. And it has only just recently happened that the Australian Army is accepting volunteer light horse people in Queensland and Western Australia. So in a couple of our states, they're allowing light horse personnel to be involved in army events as volunteer reenactors, I guess you would say.
I know the United States still does that for the 1st Cav and a couple of the other cavalry units that I've been involved with. That they would keep a couple hundred horses still, and they were used for parades, reenacting, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think when you see some of the European countries, some of those European countries have taken this on fully fledged. They love their traditions, and so in the army you can be in a mounted regiment just as it was 300 years ago. And in England, that's the same. The English have sort of divided their household cavalry into two. And when you're in the household cavalry, half the time you're at Buckingham Palace and around London on a horse, right, doing horse stuff with equipment that's hundreds of years old. And then the other half of the time you're in armored vehicles of some description and you can be deployed overseas in those vehicles. And there's a time period that after, and I'm not 100% sure, but say 3 to 5 years in that regiment, then you can volunteer, request a posting for permanent placement with the horses.
I have one just really quick question. Say, for instance, we go back to Gallipoli. During the beach landings and whatnot, I'm not expecting that there would have been any cavalry in that, right?
So the horses
during the beach landings.
Yeah, so they estimate that over the period of 10 months, April to December, during that period, the entire allies, if you like, the English, the French, the Australians, had as many as 6,000 horses at Gallipoli, but most of those were in a safer area where the English and French were. When I say safer, I shouldn't say safer, I should say more suited to horses, flat ground for horses, still being shelled, still under gunfire, but at least flatter. Whereas the very few horses that were at Gallipoli were primarily mules and donkeys, and that was because they needed them to transport provisions and ammunition up the cliff and bring the wounded down the cliff. And there were also a few horses, and of course one of our most famous horses in Australian history is Bill the Bastard, And Bill the Bastard's the most famous horse. We all think he should be the most famous horse in the world, but the thing about Bill is Bill was a hell of a horse, strong, fast, and he was a dispatch rider, and Bill would ride the 1.5 kilometers up and down the beach from the main headquarters to the Gallipoli, to the Anzac headquarters, 1.5 miles. He would do that at the gallop, under gunfire, under sniper fire, and the famous story is he did it many, many times unscathed. And then on the last time he actually did it, he was hit twice in the one ride. And fortunately, that was saved. There was a vet there. And like I say, I can get a bit carried away because.
Oh, that's fine.
No, don't. I would rather get you, like you get, there's a lot of information that when you say you're worried about getting a bit carried away that we don't know. So for God's sake, please get carried away.
So what happened is, you see, Bill had made this run so many times, and Australians have a reputation that they would bet on anything. Two flies crawling up a pub wall, they would bet on that. And so
of course,
the odds were getting tougher and tougher that Bill could keep making this run unscathed. And so an English officer, and the English officer had been a former Olympic equestrian champion, and he decided to make this run this one time on Bill. And when this was going to happen, it had raised such enormous interest amongst the Australian New Zealand troops, and they were betting on him, that it's recorded that the general in charge at Anzac Cove, this Australian general, unfortunately his name escapes me, he placed a major bet, a big bet, 10 pounds or so, fortune back then, whether or not Bill was going to make it. And that's why so many people watched this particular ride. And what happened is, as Bill's coming down the beach on his flat out gallop, the sniper gets him and he flinches. And when he flinches, this English equestrian champion's thrown off, hits the ground, knocked unconscious. But as we know, if we got horses tend to continue to do something they've been doing regularly, and it's in their head. They keep doing it. So Bill just kept going, and on the continue of the run, he's hit for a second time, and then he actually makes it through. So people that were betting on him to make it, he made it, even though he made it without a rider. And then there's a major, Shanahan is a major that was watching this happen, and he really thought Bill was a special horse. And there was a vet on the beach who was a vet for the mules and donkeys, and he had anesthetic for equine anesthetic. So they knocked Bill out. They got one bullet out of him, and the bullet in his back end rump, that they couldn't get that out, so that stayed with him for the rest of his life. And then he was evacuated off and went on. And the main reason he became so famous was because in the Battle of Romani in the desert, when the Turks made an unexpected counterattack and they got through the Australian lines, Shanahan was on Bill and he heard shouting behind the lines that he knew must be a conflict. So he rode through the Turkish lines. He found 4 troopers had run out of ammunition and were fighting Turks with their bayonets. And he called for these guys. The guys had lost their horses. Their 4 horses were dead. And he called for these blokes. And what happened was 2 of the guys jumped on Bill with Shanahan, and 1 got in each stirrup. And then carrying 5 men, the same horse that had been shot and wounded twice at Gallipoli, took off through the Turkish lines and took these men to safety. And the 2 guys that were on the stirrups, because they're side on to the rider, they actually had their Webleys, handguns, and they were shooting back at the Turks as the 5 of, that's it, the Webley 455, and they were shooting back at the Turks. And so the reason Australians get very emotional about this is because that incredible act was never acknowledged by the British as far as Shanahan getting any medals or recognition for doing that. Should have got a damn Victoria Cross. He got nothing. And the other thing is, and the other thing is, Bill never got recognised in any way for that until 3 or 4 years ago. He finally got the Purple Cross and was recognised for that deal. He got the highest award that an animal can get in warfare, and Bill finally got that.
That would have been one sight to see. That's insane.
But let's go back up onto the top, though, where the Turks are. It's not very easy for them either, from what I understand. This beachhead is like a long way from any of their railroads or roads in general. And their guys that they're getting up there are having to go over miles and miles in wagons and on foot. Correct me if I'm wrong, to get to the cliffs themselves. So they're at the same time, they're having hard times up on the top. Not near what the Anzacs are going through on the bottom, of course, but it's just nasty all the way around there at Gallipoli.
That's, yeah. And the big thing that the Turks suffered from is the shelling, because there were battleships, there were warships off the coast, the Allied warships, and they were shelling the Turks. And that's not me. And
sorry about that.
No, I think it's a little baby Jeremiah.
The thing about the shelling, you know, then you might say, oh well, the Anzacs, they had big warships, but the thing is that we go back to Kitchener, back in England, in charge overall, and the generals are making him send most of the shells to the Western Front, and so the ships have got limited shells. Yes, it's fantastic that there's warships, but they have got limited shells. And then, of course, when one of those major warships got sunk by a 2-bob submarine, and this is the thing, you know, when you have a massive piece of equipment that is destroyed by something that didn't cost very much at all, and so the Allies panicked, and a lot of the warships were called away. They couldn't be just sitting in that little cove, sitting targets anymore for the Turkish-German submarines.
Yeah. It's like we have all these things going on. The world kind of just forgets that we have two armies facing each other on this cliff. And, you know, we have things going on the Western Front, which gets all the popularity. Everybody's watching what's happening on the Western Front. Meanwhile, we have thousands and thousands of troops stuck. I don't know the exact number, but stuck at the base of this cliff on this sandy beach with no cover. I mean, a little bit of cover. They can get up in the rocks and stuff, but there's a lot going on here, and it really gets forgotten about even today. When we think of World War I, we think of trenches with a lot of us think of Americans and Germans fighting in trenches. Americans aren't going to be there for another 4 years. It's going to be a long deal, but the Anzacs, they get forgotten a lot, and thankfully Mel Gibson in the 1980s and his movie brought that back to a lot of us to remember. But what have you talked about the neck yet? I was reading the comments over here. Let's talk about the neck.
Yeah, well, the thing about the neck is that when I initially made a video about the neck, it took me about 20 attempts, and you know, now that I'm an older man, I can freely admit that that's because I get so upset. I get very emotional talking about the neck, and that's because everybody on this planet, everyone that is watching this show, even if they've never played tennis, they know what a tennis court looks like. And that is the tennis court. The neck can be described as a rectangular, the tennis court is rectangular. So on either long side of the neck, which is that you imagine the long side of a tennis court, it just drops away into cliffs both sides. So then you've got the long of the tennis court, and you imagine at one end of the tennis court you have a series of trenches. So in those trenches, the trenches are filled with Turkish troops, to the point I'll get to in a minute how packed it was with Turkish troops. And there are also 3 brand spanking new, just delivered Maxim machine guns set up. And the British command told the Australians that they were going to be in their trench, which is the other end of that tennis court, and they were going to be in 3 ranks, and they were going to take their 303 rifles. They were going to take their 303 rifles, and they were going to take the magazines out of their rifles, because if they took the magazines out, then there was no doubt there would be no shooting, because they didn't want them to shoot. They wanted them to not stop and shoot. That you had to run and get into the trenches, and once you got in your trench, then you took to the Turks with your bayonet. That was the plan. So they did not even have loaded weapons, and they were told, and I've caught me on the hop, I think it was 0700 hours, but whatever the time was, they were told there would be heavy shelling, and when the shelling stopped at 0700 hours, those hundreds and hundreds of Australian soldiers that were in 3 separate ranks, the first rank would get up and run into the Turkish trenches, and many of them had little sticks with flags on, and they would have put the sticks down with flags on to show how far they had progressed into the Turkey, over the neck, through the trenches, and into the ground behind the Turks. And so at 0700, when the shelling stopped, out of the trenches, go. And what happened is 4 minutes before, the officer is sitting there with his watch waiting, and his whistle, waiting for 7 o'clock to send the first wave over. And at 4 minutes before 7, the warships go silent and the shelling stops. And so the officer, looking at his watch, should I send them or shouldn't I? British rules for the British Army, you do as you are told. And so he is sitting there. Now, what happened in 4 minutes doesn't sound much, but in 4 minutes,
it's a lot.
Saw the Turks poke their head over the top of a trench. Nothing happened, no shooting. And so then what happens is the Turks start climbing out of their trench, because they are so jammed in there that the first rank of Turks come and sit on the sandbags facing down the tennis court, shoulder to shoulder, sitting, and then above them, they're standing, just waiting in the silence, knowing what's going to happen. And so 4 minutes later, with the machine guns cocked and all those blokes ready to shoot, the whistle blows, and the first rank of Australians and New Zealanders climb out of a trench, and to be hit with a solid wall of gunfire, machine gun fire, hundreds of bullets, and most of those blokes took 1, possibly 2 steps before they were mown down. The officer in the trench is sent this. If you've seen the Mel Gibson movie, well, this is a bit of what happened, is that he sends a runner back to say, this is insanity, I'm not going to send the second wave. The second wave, he fulfills his order still, he blows his whistle, and the second wave goes over the top, and they start going. They're mown down as well. When the runner gets back, because he finally gets back before the third wave, the message he's got back is, no, it's going well. Send the third, do as you're told, send the third wave. The historic story is the officer, I won't swear because I'm tempted to use the F word, but the officer decides, no, I'm not going to send this. And what happened is, one of the sergeants, one of the NCOs, who's all geared up, knowing that they're going to go any minute, he blows it, and the sergeant takes the third wave over. And then the third wave is mown down again. And that is one of the most, there were lots of terrible, terrible things that happened at Gallipoli, but the neck is one of the worst. And the reason you know it's the worst is because everybody can put a tennis court into their head and think, what madness, absolute wasted lives. Terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That's sheer stupidity.
Well, okay, give me this. I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but was that a British commander giving that order, or was that an Anzac commander?
Oh, hell no. It was British, and the sad thing is that I say the sad thing is, but the British Army, I don't know what the American Army's like, but the British Army motto hundreds and hundreds of years ago is when you get a man, you turn the man into a brick so that the brick becomes a wall. And that was why they could get those muzzle blokes with muzzle loaders to march towards the French in the Napoleonic Wars, and guys would stand 30 or 40 meters apart, just shoot at each other. You just did what you're told. In your Civil War, you know, you had the same thing. Those blokes just marched till they were almost on top of each other, and then just point blank shoot at each other. And it was just you did what you were told. And if you were an officer, you didn't dare not do what you were told.
Yeah, you could get killed by not doing what you're told. You'd been put in a firing squad.
Yeah.
As an enlisted man, anyways. Officer, well, put you in a court martial or something.
I'm not sure if Haig is in command of. He actually had a word for it, and his word for it was, "This is just wastage." You know, every day we have so much wastage, and that wastage was usually 1,000 lives. You know, and he didn't see it as anything but wastage. And
that's sad.
And that's just how they thought about it. But we're still this is going on for an extremely long amount of time. The Anzacs can't break up the cliff. The Turks can't drive them back into the ocean. And so what always gets me is these people are living in kind of a filthy situation because they can't go back. They can't go up. They're having, correct me if I'm wrong, but are they not having to haul their water in from like way far away? They're having to haul water.
The things about the start of the First World War is it's hard to get our heads around, but they had to bring in water to Gallipoli. There was no water whatsoever. And because they didn't have sufficient containers to bring the water in, the water was being brought in used fuel drums. And so this is something else that when you see there's so many of these blokes' diaries have been saved, and they're in the Australian War Memorial, which is our major history centre for Australia at war. So many of these diaries say that even when they got water, it was tainted with kerosene or oil, and it still was almost unfit to drink.
And the disease on that beach, I mean, we're talking about, this is not a 3-day in and out deal. This is months and months and months, and you're talking dysentery and terrible living conditions and constantly being fired on. And I just feel like this could have been handled a lot better if they would have let the Anzac commanders take more control, because as we've just discussed, the British commanders, they don't care what's happening really. All they're really concerned about is what's going on the Western Front. They're not watching and paying attention, in my opinion.
Yeah. So the other thing about Gallipoli, and I haven't got the statistics, it's in one of my videos, but the other thing about Gallipoli is if you look at the people who were evacuated from Gallipoli through wounds or death, and you look at the people that were evacuated from Gallipoli through disease, the disease figure is far higher than the wounded or killed figure.
That's very
typical. And the huge thing about that is there was an island, Lemnos, not too far away, which was set up with a lot of nurses went there, doctors were there. And what's so incredible about that is that these huge numbers of perilously ill soldiers were taken to that island, and most, not all, but most of them actually survived. They went back into the war. They didn't go back to Gallipoli. Most of them didn't go back to Gallipoli, but they survived because it was disease that had got them from off of Gallipoli. And the thing was that again, it's so hard to get your head around that the death rate on those shocking cliffs was so high that they couldn't get to a lot of the bodies. A lot of those bodies lay rotting. And so the flies were off the number of flies that were on rotting corpses. You couldn't go to the toilet somewhere safe because you're under sniper fire. The latrines were under sniper fire. And so the disease, that's why the disease was rampant. And the diaries of the soldiers that were there say that no sooner had they got a biscuit or a bit of bully beef or some jam or something, then it was black. It was instantly black. And all of the things that they tried, they tried all these things to be able to try and eat without taking mouthfuls of flies that had just come from rotting corpses.
Yeah.
Penicillin wasn't invented yet, was it?
Yeah.
It was? When did penicillin come out? I thought it was early 1900s, but I don't remember when.
Well,
so what was missing from the First World War were quality antibiotics.
Yeah.
That's the thing that was missing in the First World War. You had, yeah.
Yeah. I was about to say, yeah, you couldn't even dig a latrine, so you were just there.
Yeah.
And this for forever, just go on and on and on. And I mean, those guys
throw it into the ocean if they were.
I'm not to diss any other countries, but I have a feeling if that was France, they would have left a long time before the. But you know, the Australians, they just stayed and stayed and stayed, and it was so bad. Many of us today know that there's a famous song written by Eric Bogle, and a lot of even young people know it today because it was in a video game a few years ago called "The Band Played Waltzing Matilda." I don't know how you feel about that song, Steve, but I do feel like it has some honesty in it in some places.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I'll have to post you a check for saying that, because what you've talked about are two separate videos that I've made that I haven't yet posted on my Trooper Codys YouTube channel, and that's because Waltzing Matilda, I'm sure lots of people around the world must know it. Lots of people in Commonwealth countries must know that song, and it was written by our most famous poet, Banjo Patterson, who wrote Clancy of the Overflow. He wrote The Man from Snowy River. Wonderful, such an emotive poet. So in 1895, he wrote Waltzing Matilda about Australia, and every Australian soldier loved it. Australians sang it when they were riding or marching because it said, "Look out, world, here come the Australians," and that's what that song was all about. And so it is a very powerful song. It's a wonderful song. And so some people say, when you look at our national anthem, Australians all let us rejoice, for we are young and free. You look at our national anthem, and some people say, we should have Waltzing Matilda as our song. Now, when you initially think about Waltzing Matilda, you hear, once a jolly swag man camped beside a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. You think, oh, wow, that should be the national anthem. But what you're talking about is unemployed man, a man who can't get a job, who's wandering the country because he can't get a job. There is no work. Then you're talking about, down came a jumbuck to drink at the billabong. Up jumped the swag man and grabbed him with glee. You're talking about a man that's stealing stock. That's what it is. He's stealing stock. So then you go on and you go to, up rode the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. Yes, you rich bastard. You're on a horse more expensive than half the houses in the town where the poor are starving. Up rode the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. What's a squatter? A squatter is a super wealthy man who's got masses of crown land for next to nothing to keep his stock on and make even more money at the expense of the poor. So then you think, yeah, okay, perhaps I can see that. And then you come to the next line. So we've got, up rode the squatter, mounted on his thoroughbred. Down rode the troopers, 1, 2, and 3. What are the troopers? The troopers are the police that are in the bloody pay. They're being working for a man that's got more money than he knows what. So we're going to talk about corrupt police. And so then,
Yeah.
of course,
We're dangerously close to stepping on Ned Kelly here in just a second, aren't we?
Well, before we get there, though, for anyone that still thinks, and we have to get to a serious topic here, because it's now, if anyone still thinks that should be Australia's national anthem, let's come to the end, which is up jumped the swag man and leapt into the billabong. You'll never take me alive, says he. And he commits suicide. How can you have a national anthem about a man about suicide? It's too serious.
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
And so you can't. And it's a wonderful song. It's a rousing song. I've made a video of me doing it, riding Cody through the scrub, no houses, no cars, but you cannot have it as a national anthem.
It fires up the Irish in me.
What is the deal? What is the deal with a lot of the songs back then being so dark, dude? My God. Even the children's songs back then are incredibly dark.
They lived with darkness, so that's how they
dealt
with
it. They lived like we grew in the dark.
You see, what's interesting is you say it's dark, but what you got to remember is that when Australia, 1788, and what happened is, why have we got people being sent to Australia? Because the British had more Navy ships than they knew what to do with. So they said, here's a great idea. We'll take the masts off them. We'll take the sails away. We'll sell whatever we can. And then we'll take the hulk and we'll go and park it in a swamp somewhere. And then we're going to fill it with prisoners. And this is going to become a prison. And that's a prison hulk is what they were called. And so they did that. But then what happened is they had so many prisoners, they ran out of hulks to store put people in. So then they decided, someone had the great idea, let's send all our convicts to Australia. And so that's really, it's all part of the ethos of why Australians are how we are about self-sufficiency and not being perhaps...
Uh-oh, we lost him.
Oh, no.
He's still there.
Oh, there he is.
Okay.
You're good.
Go ahead. I've to add to what you're saying, that is why most of us people that are from Irish descent are very closely tied to this history of Australia, because a lot of the prisoners going down there are Irish, as far as I know. There, he's back.
He's back.
Can you hear us?
Just to let everybody know, remember that Steve is on the other side of the world.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Cut off.
I can hear you.
We can hear you. Can you hear us? So forgive us for any problems, guys. Just remember he's on the other side of the world.
It is difficult to get clear on the other side of the world with this. But yeah, we can hear you. If you want to just keep talking, we'll just keep listening. You can't hear us.
I don't think you can hear us.
Well, I'm very sorry to say I have lost. Yeah, I can see the thumb up. I'm very sorry. I've lost dialogue. I've lost volume. I can see you, can't hear you.
Yep, I can hear you. Keep going.
I need a piece of paper to write. Keep going.
Ethan's in the chat wanting to talk about Ned Kelly.
Ned Kelly.
Talk to him, can you, Snapper? Right quick. Oh, he's gonna go.
I'm going to grab my phone down, guys, and I'm going to try to get a hold of Steve. And I'm sure he knows what to do. I'm sure he's just going to reset his phone and try to log back on.
I'll go through these comments while we're getting back in contact with him.
All right, I'm going to turn my cam off and my mic off, but I will be back, guys. Okay. Sorry once again.
Okay. Yeah, guys. And Duke, if you guys are wondering, we do have moderators out tonight just because we're keeping the political stuff down. Duke's out there with his wrench. So there, Steve's back.
Am I back?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I've got you. I'm very sorry.
All right. Yes. We're back, Snapper.
Hey, back. I'm back.
Well, this would be a good time to get back into where we were on Gallipoli. And we still have, we have more people in there since that than we had to begin with. We have 17 people in here. Let's get, eventually we know that this stalemate at Gallipoli's got to end. Something like 8 months, right? 8 months of
Yes.
this laying under fire on a beach.
Yep.
So who makes this decision?
That caught me on the hop. Sometimes you just got to confess. You have to confess you don't know bloody everything. You know, it's such a basic question, and I can't answer who finally made that decision that they had to be pulled out.
Would you say that's a British decision, or is that an Anzacs finally getting their way?
I was going to say I'd eat my hat, but it's too precious to me.
It's a nice hat. And I mean, that's the thing too, guys. Like anybody watching this, us who study history, you can't remember everything. There's a lot of videos that I've gone through in high def, and 10 months later, you ask me about it, and I'm just going to look at you like, what?
Yeah. So the thing that I am prepared to say that it was not an Australian decision, it was not a New Zealand decision, because they didn't have the clout to make that decision. So really, what it boils down to is it had to have been an allied decision. And you know, you mentioned before, and I nearly said something before about when you said everyone knows the Western Front better, and that's because the truth about Gallipoli never got out while Gallipoli was happening, and that the censorship was so strict about what was happening at Gallipoli that the Australian public didn't know about it. One of the outrages, one of the true outrages about Gallipoli is it wasn't until it was all over that the Australian Prime Minister found out about it. He was kept in the dark about how bad it was and what the losses were. The Australian Prime Minister. And again, this comes back to me saying that in that era, 1914, the contempt the British hierarchy held for Australians, you know, we were just held in contempt, really, and it was shocking, and so even to the extent that there was an officer called Oliver Haig, and Oliver Haig was an officer in the Australian Light Horse, and he used to write under the pseudonym Trooper Bluegum, and he would write some things back to the Australian newspapers that got published under the pseudonym Trooper Bluegum, because he couldn't even put his real name to it because of the trouble. He'd have been court-martialed if he'd have been found out for doing that.
Yeah.
So during this time, if you were a Commonwealth of Britain, you would have never had full control over your troops. I mean, you would have had brigade, whatever, but commanders. But when it came to the big deal, you were just still another person telling your troops what to do. They told you what you were going to do with your troops. Absolutely.
Even to the extent of by the time of October 1917, when the Beersheba charge took place, even then Chauvel had only just been given outright command of the Light Horse, Australian Light Horse, and that's why he made that decision to undergo the charge, because at least he had the authority to make that decision. That you know, the Light Horse had they say they'd never done that before. That there had been a few charges before when the troops needed to get somewhere quickly, but call that the most official Australian Light Horse charge.
Another quick question for you. At this time, it's been a while since I've studied World War I and II like very well. At this time, we're still in the middle of. We know that Napoleonic style war is no longer effective. We learned that in the American Civil War. The whole world did. But we're still in the middle of not figuring it out much further than that. Know that we're still using a little bit of both in the very beginning of World War I. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, that whole trench warfare thing it's just insane. Absolute insanity. And to a degree, you got to give Churchill his credit, because to a degree, that's what his plan was. Let's go around the trenches and come up behind the Germans. And unfortunately, it just didn't work.
You've got, in fall of 1914, you actually have French battalions in bright, flashy clothes marching across fields to face Germans. And it was completely insane.
Well, my favorite, the Bicycle Man.
Yeah. There's a story about Austro-Hungarian march that they made, and they made it over the mountains. But the commander, I can't remember what his name was at the moment, he completely forgot that there was such a thing as airplanes, and the airplanes had seen them coming for miles and miles and miles, and they were completely prepared when the Austro-Hungarians got over the mountains. But
well, I can tell you to this day, the military still looks back. It never looks forward. Even though you think they look forward, they don't. When I first joined the military, we were still doing Vietnam-style tactics, and we had already invaded Iraq. I mean, in Afghanistan. My dad only did Vietnam-style tactics. They never even thought, hey, there could be a war in the desert. Ain't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
This is the military. They learn as they go. They never truly learn until it happens.
To get back to Gallipoli, we now have this problem of everyone's decided we're going to get out of here, but we came in without a whole lot of gunfire, but we can't get out without a whole lot of gunfire.
A whole lot of gunfire. Yeah.
Some people are estimating that when they try to leave that beach, they're going to lose 30% of their guys, from what I understand. That's what they think. They come up with some pretty ingenious ideas to get off that beach.
Yeah, and that's, you've seen a couple of movies have shown it. And the thing about it is, for once, Hollywood got it right, because that's what they did. They rigged up the rifles in frames. They rigged up the cans on the triggers, and they rigged it up so that the water dripping into the cans, each one was at a different rate. And that was so that they would go off at different times. And they kept reducing. So some soldiers stayed, and they reduced the number, and they reduced the number. And then finally, when they were down to a skeleton numbers of troops left, they set those guns up with the water droplets, and then they snuck off in the middle of the night. And really, for once, I was going to say God was on their side, but somebody was on their side, because it went off without a hitch. They deserved it going off without a hitch after what they'd been through, but the Turks were completely taken by surprise. They came down to attack those trenches. They expected to get slaughtered as they came down, and the reality was, when they got there were empty trenches. And an Australian sense of humour, messages like, have a cigarette, have a beer, this sort of thing.
Honestly,
that is
something that intelligent that saved that many lives. Somebody like that should deserve something like the Victoria Cross.
You guys out there, if you don't know what he's talking about, go on your YouTube when this is done, of course. Don't leave us yet. Go on your YouTube and type in drip rifle, and you will see I believe it was a corporal that came up with it, and it was just the most ingenious thing to sneak out under the cover of darkness and make the Turks think you're still there. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that they got one particularly brave group of boys to go out and play a game of cricket in full view of the Turks.
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah. It's hard to put into words, really, about the camaraderie, and the other thing they say about Gallipoli in particular is the sense that the feeling, what does it matter? We're dead anyway, and that's because they I'm sure this happened in the trenches for all sides, but you got to the point where you knew you were going to die, so
might as well have a good time.
Yeah,
might as well have a good time if I'm going to die anyways. Stop stressing about it.
Yeah, there's a story. Anyway, so that's the big thing with cricket. That's the Australian thing. Is about always beating the Poms at cricket. For anyone that's English that's watching, Australia always beats the Poms at cricket. And of course, it was a big thing to have cricket wherever the Australians went, to have a game of cricket. Much more. We have, the Australian rules footy, which is a bit like rugby, and we call football, English football, we call soccer. But if there's one game that all Australians get into, it's the game of cricket.
It was, but so what happens after that? These troops don't get to go home.
Oh hell no! No.
Oh, no.
No. So is it wrong for me to sort of caress this while I'm talking to you?
No, that's everything that's so right about this channel.
It's actually
You have done the correct.
hold it.
So the one thing now, Garrett, you tell me if I move into politically incorrect territory here, but there's one thing we do have in Australia these days, and that is a really strong, crazy anti-gun lobby. And so, you know, for me to be sitting here in Australia cradling my 3-0, there are a few people that won't be happy with that. But the point is, it was their best friend, you know, apart from the that's not a knife, this is a knife. But and now I've done my typical old man. Yeah. now that I'm hugging my rifle, I can't remember what we were talking about.
You were talking about it being their best friend.
Yeah, before that though, there was a serious subject, and I've lost what we were talking about.
Well, you were talking about Australia being very anti-gun, and I think you were talking about maybe because of the love of this firearm being your best friend. This was your life source. This is what got you home to your family. It means so much more than just a piece of metal and wood.
No, Garrett, I'm sorry, you've just reminded me. What you said is they didn't leave Gallipoli and come home. And of course, no, that's exactly right. They left Gallipoli. When they left Gallipoli, all of the Australian and New Zealand troops then went back to fight in the Middle East, but they realised that the hierarchy realised that there were such significant numbers there that they could take a significant percentage of those to the Western Front, and so that's what happened. The light horse, the AIF, which are the ordinary, perhaps ordinary is not the right word to use, the non-mounted infantry and the mounted infantry, they then had their numbers significantly reduced, and they then went to the Western Front, where they stayed right through till November 18, and then still didn't go home. And some of them volunteered then to go fight in Russia and continued fighting into 19, and then by mid 19 most of them had finally come home.
Well, let's get on to the Western Front a little bit. How come is it, and this is my opinion, just my opinion, when I started studying this, during the centennial, the 2014 centennial, I really got into studying on this, and I discovered on the Western Front we got these guys that nobody even hears about today. And like I told you the other day, I feel like they're doing 70% of the fighting and getting 7% of the credit. They are a lot of places on the Western Front that you never hear about, including Passchendaele and places like that.
Yeah,
Flanders. And they.
Well, I think I don't know how to describe it. We are such a small country, and small population, and so when we're going to be talking about the Western Front, if the French are talking about the Western Front, there's so many more French. If the English are talking about the Western Front today, then most of the English are going to be talking about their troops, not the Australian troops. And so because we're a small voice, we don't talk about it much. And really, it's only, I think this sort of stuff, it's only in the last decade that this sort of stuff is starting to get talked about more by Australians because of social media, because of Facebook and YouTube and these sort of things. Australians are starting to talk about these things a bit more. And, you know, and the other thing, it's scary what some people think, because I posted a photo once which showed the Australian Light Horse Machine Gun Division, and basically they had the Vickers 303 machine gun, and they light horse, you're only using the horse for rapid transport. And so you've got these Vickers, these big machine guns strapped on the horses, and the light horse guys are still wearing the same uniform that I'm wearing. And somebody sent me a message and said, I just find it amazing that those guys could fire those machine guns off those horses during the Battle of Beersheba. And I thought, how scary is a person? And you have to be, when somebody makes a genuine comment, you don't want to just tell them they're an idiot. You try to be polite back to them. But how little do people know when they actually thought the Vickers being carried on that horse was fired from the horse?
From the horse.
Yep. Well, they show that kind of thing in movies nowadays, especially in like westerns and stuff. You'll see
Yeah,
that kind
that's
of
true.
ridiculous, but
That's true.
it's utterly ridiculous. But one thing I found about, especially on the Western Front, is you see a lot of times, once again, the British command. I mean, when you're getting into 1917, the French are absolutely revolting against their command. They're not going anywhere. They're not doing anything. The British are wore out. So the British want these little shock trench raids and everything going on. And you're seeing that what they're doing is they're getting the Anzacs to the front and sending them in on the trench raids and doing a lot of the dangerous stuff. The stuff, they'll have no maps. It'll be dark. It'll be anything that's send the Anzacs out there is what it all appears to me to be.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Again, when we came out here, 1788, we came out here. We're half a planet away from anyone by sailing ship, and so you've got to be completely self-reliant. And then when you go out into the bush in Australia to round up cattle or to whatever, there's no help coming from anyone ever anywhere. And when something breaks, there's no repairs, there's no repair equipment anywhere. When something breaks, you have to fix it yourself. And so I think Australians became super self-reliant, and the other thing about what you said is that we had many months of training before we left to go to war. And so those guys had months and months of training with their bayonets on their rifles. And if you've seen some of the training film, the way they trained with these rifles, having
Please come back.
almost like sword fights. Are we back? So when we first went to the Middle East is a great example, because when we first went there, we were facing Turks, most of whom were farmers from the surrounding area, and called up to fight the Australians. And on the other hand, you had Australians who had spent months and months and months training with their bayonets. And there are many accounts of the Turks surrendering when they saw the Australians, because they were so terrified of the Australian bayonet and hand-to-hand combat. And that's the sort of thing that it gives the troops a self-respect, if not a feeling almost of immortality. And so by the time Australians got to the Western Front, I guess you would say they almost had the commando ethos. You've got somewhere tough, send us, we'll go in with bayonets, we'll go in with hammers, we'll go in with maces, bats with nails on the end, and take the trenches by hand like that.
You guys out there in the comments, if you're aware of the stories of the shovel fights and the trench knives and all that kind of stuff going on, a lot of those stories do come from Anzacs. You won't hear that because if you're in America, like we've discussed before, of course, if we're in America, we think, oh, we went in there and won the war. If you're a British, you think, oh, we were there the whole time and we won the war. If you're French, you think, well, we were just there. I mean, of course, they suffered a lot. I mean, it's not
French. Poor French. Listen, they didn't get their yellow streak till World War II. They were pretty badass during World War I.
But it's just you're going to run into. But when you look at it in reality, there are a lot of smaller factions like the Anzacs that are doing a lot of this fighting that a lot of people don't even realize that we're even there.
And to be honest, it's true. We'd always look at some other place that isn't considered, like, being that it's a British Commonwealth, they look down upon the Australians. So might as well let them go out there and do all the killing and the fighting. And unfortunately, that was the way they did it back then. That's still the way we do it now, unfortunately.
Because I say Anzacs, and then again and again I'm talking Australians. So I'm going to put my 2 bobs worth. I don't know if you know that expression. Put my 2 bobs worth in about the New Zealanders. And if there's ever a hell of a story about the New Zealanders, we go to World War II, and we're at Monte Cassino where the Germans are dug in. They've got tanks dug in behind cliff faces. They are on the top of the hill, and they are proving impossible to shift. And they think, again, the Allied commanders think that if they can get this bridge built under enormous, unrelenting gunfire, if they can get this bridge built, maybe it will help them take Monte Cassino, Italy, World War II. And so who do they send in to do this? They send in New Zealand Maoris. It's the, the New Zealand, you've seen the Maoris, the big, tall, heavy-set, tattooed blokes. Tattooing is part of their condition. And that's who they sent in under withering German gunfire, shell fire, and again, there's a great Anzac story that so few people know.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, weren't those people that have that amazing war dance? Is that the Maoris?
That's their
yeah.
voice. That's it.
Oh,
that's
you ever want to get pumped up? Like, wow, this will make you want to fight? Watch one of those. They're amazing.
That's exactly what it is. It's before they had intertribe, before the white man.
Yeah.
When they had, that's right.
I saw one of those in person once, and I was just like, wow, that was like dripping with masculinity. That was amazing.
That's the way to put it, dripping with masculinity. But we'll have to do a whole episode. We're going to have you back quite a few times. We still got a lot of time, but I got people over here saying, let's do Ned Kelly, and people saying, let's do World War II. We're going to have to do several episodes.
I told you.
I'm happy to do it. And what I have to say is that if there's somebody there that's saying, let's do Ned Kelly, and they're an American saying, let's do Ned Kelly, it is going to be interesting. And I hope you don't just switch me off when I say this, because I don't know how long. Anyway, so I'm a former 40-year serving police officer. That's what I did before I retired. And so my version of Ned Kelly might not be what everybody's happy with.
Somebody else's version of Ned Kelly would be. Understandable.
So
That's understandable.
I would like to think that my version of Ned Kelly's fair, but he's not 100% the folk hero that he's sort of been made out to be, due to being a victim of his times, and a victim of the times of the police force then, which was incredibly corrupt. So we'll save that for another episode maybe then, but I'm happy to do that.
I'll just tell you.
Down for that one. I'm looking already. I'm going to put that on the map. I want to see that episode.
In America, we look at him as kind of like Jesse James, which even in America, Jesse James, you can take both sides. This is something we discuss.
Fantastic.
It's free. It's history, and nobody cares. Nobody's alive from then anyway now. Yep. So it's just history that it's always good to look at both sides.
Exactly.
And, I have always just been thoroughly impressed with Ned Kelly's blacksmithing skills, but that is a whole nother story.
Happy. And listen, I'll just as a teaser, I'm sitting here in a genuine, an authentic 1914 light horse uniform with the correct bayonet, and the bayonet's even still got its hook on it, which shortly after they got there, they realized that bayonet was actually a disadvantage, and they've all been cut off. And I've got my 1918 manufactured. It's got its date stamp of it, 1918. So when we do Ned Kelly, though, I'll make sure I'm wearing my 1850 police uniform, because I've got one of those too. So
I'll wear
that.
You got. I probably shouldn't ask you, but can you break out a Martini Henry for that?
So the sad part is, yes, I could. I haven't got one, but I'm allowed to buy one if I want to. But the truly sad part is our handgun laws in Australia are so tight. Some of your viewers might be interested in this, because the handgun laws in Australia are so tight that I have a pistol license. I am allowed to own a pistol license, and if I had a pistol, the South Australian Mounted Police back then used a Colt, Navy Colt. If I had one legally, I am not allowed to get it out in my room here and
Mhm.
show it to you, because I'm only supposed to get it out of its locked case at a registered pistol range. That's
So you
how
can't
tough
even bring it out in your own house to clean it,
No,
like that kind of
no.
law?
No,
Wow.
technically, you see, they don't want to make it so they say, oh, well, if you're cleaning it, you can get it out. So then I say, okay, guys, I'll talk to you while I'm cleaning.
While I'm cleaning
So-
my pistol? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the way they make it simple is they simply say it stays in your safe. It comes out of your safe in a locked box into your locked car. It then goes to the pistol range or to a gun shop, and then you can get it out. And even you're not supposed to get the pistol out. You go to the club rooms, you're not supposed to get it out of its locked box until you're at the bench ready to shoot. Then you can get it out.
That's
That's pretty sad.
That is very
Sad
sad.
for people
I'll just say this. If you want to bring anything you want to bring down there, what you can't show, if you need to show a 51 Colt Navy, just let us know. Between Snapper and I, we can fill the screens.
We
Brilliant.
can fill the screen with almost anything.
That's what we'll do for that show. That's what we'll do.
Matter of fact, I got a 51 Navy rad kill.
This is going to become a cult series. But
Yes, so
we still have a lot. We still have more World War I to cover here, guys.
yes, we do.
One of the absolute best Anzac stories is yet to come, and that's what's happening in the
Indeed.
Middle East in 1917. And I don't know how you want to start with that, because I'm not sure about how it all goes. I know about what happens about 12 hours before Beersheba, 48 hours before Beersheba, and that's all I really know about that whole deal. But you want to tell us, we'd be glad to hear it.
Okay, so we have a major city called Gaza, and the English have been trying to take Gaza for years, and it is so well defended, it's entrenched. The British have this wonderful new invention called the tank. The tank is going to take Gaza, and everything that they try fails. The troops attacking Gaza have to cover vast desert area where they're machine gunned and open to artillery fire. So somebody comes up with the idea, got to take the flank. The end of the flank is a small group of wells and a railway station called Beersheba. And because the Germans, who are basically the ones giving them military advice, the Germans know this is the flank and it has to be well defended. The Germans have set up Beersheba as a fortress that will never be taken, because it's in an area of a plain with many miles of open desert in front of it. And if anyone tries to take it, the trenches, the artillery, it's just not going to happen. So on top of all of that, as if all of that isn't bad enough, the wells have all been set up to be blown. If it's not going to happen, they can never take Beersheba, but should they, we can destroy the wells, the water. And so a plan is devised that there's going to be a massive build-up of troops concentrated to attack Gaza. And just before that attack, there will be a feint, there'll be a pretend attack on Beersheba, and that is to draw attention away from Gaza, so that we don't intend to take Beersheba, but this is going to be to draw attention away while we attack Gaza. Really, that was not true. It was never intended to be a feint. It was intended right from the start to be an all-out attack to take Beersheba, turn the flank and attack Gaza from behind. So wonderful plan, get ready to do it, and it doesn't work. It's exactly the same story. The Pommy hierarchy is good at doing one thing. It's what Einstein said: if you keep doing it and failing it and doing it and failing it, it's madness. And that's what they were just doing, the same thing. But fortunately, several regiments of light horse, the 10th and the 14th from memory, the 10th, the entire 10th and 14th Regiments of the Australian Light Horse are just behind the first row of hills that leads down to Bathsheba. And Chevelle, Australian in charge of the Australian troops, has this, who knows where this idea really came from, but don't dismount the light horse, charge them straight into Bathsheba across 6 or 7 kilometers of open, flat desert. So when you think of that distance, especially if you've been in the military, you know, artillery and rifle fire and machine gun fire, 6 and 7 Ks, that's a kilometers. That's a long way. 4 miles, 4 miles or so. And so the other thing about the Australian light horse is that they had a formation called artillery formation. So when you went into artillery formation, each trooper was far enough apart that if a shell landed exactly between the two of them, there was a chance they both might survive. And if a shell landed on one man, it was only going to take out one man and one horse, because the ones the either side of that would be unscathed. So that was artillery formation. So Chevelle says, as the sun is setting, this is it. We cannot last another 12 hours overnight. The horses have had no water for 36, 48 hours. Either we say to the horses, the light horse, right now, head for water, or we send them in. So that was the decision that was made, to send the horses in. And so the 2 regiments of light horse come over the rise, and when they come over the rise, that's the first the Turks and Germans know of the light horse and that they are charging. They're in artillery formation. The Germans did have an aircraft up, but even so, the aircraft didn't have radio communication with the ground, and the aircraft had bombs, and it dropped a few bombs, yes, but still under artillery formation anyway. So the horses go over the rise, and the plan is walk, get to a certain distance, trot, get to a certain distance, canter, and then when we're again get to the next, then we'll gallop. But the accounts are the horses were so thirsty, crazed with thirst, they could smell the water in the wells. Even at that distance, they knew there was water there. And so when the troops, you know, for anyone that's ridden a horse, you'll know that if you keep that horse calm at the walk, then that horse might be a bit spooky, might be a bit jumpy, but you can keep it at a walk. But once a horse is with a group of other horses and there's any movement, even like just to a trot, that first horse that goes to a trot, somebody else will go to a canter, and then suddenly they're crazed and they're all herd mentality.
Herd mentality.
Forget the rider, forget the man. Herd mentality is what's going to save my life. And so that's what happened. Those horses went out into a stretching gallop, and those blokes were all such incredible riders, because you couldn't be in the light horse unless you were a fantastic rider, a great horseman. The horses into a stretching gallop, and those blokes who had already knew they couldn't use their rifles. They didn't have rifle buckets then. In those days, they carried their rifles on their back. They had their bayonets. They knew the Turks were terrified of their bayonets. They already knew that, and so they attacked, galloping the 6 kilometers on out of control horses. Blokes' diaries later recorded they couldn't have stopped their horses even if they wanted to. Several riders. So there are stories about how the horses leapt, that when they got there, I'll go back in a minute, but when they got there, there are stories that the horses flew over the trenches and kept going, and those horses were still flat gallop right into Bathsheba, and the guys jumped off and they saved the wells, yes, but those blokes say that was not their conscious decision to keep going. They couldn't stop their horses, and that's how the horses went charging into the town. But before they even got that far, in the movie The Light Horseman, they make a big thing about the German officer saying, "Don't shoot, hold your fire, we're going to wait until they dismount and then we'll shoot when they're walking on foot. Now, nobody knows if that.
Let me just
Yes?
ask you one thing right here, because my brother Ethan is out there. So we're talking about, these are not cavalry troops. These are mounted infantry. They would be mechanized infantry today.
Yep.
So their tactics are generally to get to a position, get off, and fight on. Generally, that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Are there any revolvers? Are most of them armed with revolvers, or is that not a thing for the average light horseman?
This was something we were going to talk about, and we didn't get to it, did we? So what happens in the light horse is when you're a trooper, when you're a sergeant, when you're an average Joe, you don't have a handgun. Now, the Australian officers, they pretty much turned a blind eye to everything. And so what you found in real life is that nearly every single Australian trooper had a handgun. Most of them had Webley 455s that you've held up those before. But two things were the most prized item an Australian light horseman could have. And you've held up number one of the two. The second most prized was the Luger. But if you if you had the broom handle Mauser, then you would not sell that for 50 packets of smokes, because most of those came in the wooden stock. The wooden stock was well worn as a shoulder holster, and then you took it out of its holster and you put this wooden holster on the back of the gun, and you had a stock on the back of the broom handle Mauser.
Yeah, a little pistol
carbine. The British officers probably would have had a fit if they'd ever found one of their troops had a broom handle Mauser, and Australian officers looked the other way and thought nothing of their blokes carrying all sorts of weapons like that. But for the charge was going to be the bayonet, because the blokes thought that when they got there, they'd be jumping off and using the bayonet in the trenches, because the Turks surrendered in such enormous numbers. When they saw Australians with bayonets, they surrendered in enormous numbers. So the other thing I was going to say, because you brought it up, is yes, the Australian light horse is the infantry. It's infantry foot soldiers. How can we move infantry foot soldiers faster? Let's put them on a horse. And so what happens is, again, I'm going to give a plug to one of my videos where I show you exactly how this happened, that you rode in a row, a section. A section was 4 men. You stayed in that section forever. You were numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when you rode to where there was going to be combat, 1, 3, and 4 got off. 2 stayed on his horse. 1 handed his reins to number 2. Number 4 put his reins through the reins of number 3. And number 3 then took 3 and 4's reins and gave them to number 2. And then number 2 had to ride off on his horse with the other 4. They rode off clear of combat. And then you had 75% of your men were engaged in combat, while 25% of your men took the horses, the transport, the important part, the escape, if you like, off to the side to keep them safe. So that was what the German officer was expecting the Australian light horse to do. And of course, realized, I can't say realized too late, really, because he had 6 kilometers to realize what was happening. But
well, how fast is a horse at full trot?
The full gallop would be about 20 miles.
20 miles an hour?
35 miles an hour?
No, it might be something like that. A mile one might get up to 20, but, faster horses, younger horses.
But at 4 miles at that speed, I mean, that would have only taken less than, that would have been 10, 15 minutes.
Oh,
you could break a wind.
No. So at the moment, I keep doing these teasers outrageously on your channel. I'm doing teasers for my channel, but at the moment
it's all good, man.
I'm practicing reenacting of the Sheba charge over 500 meters, and I'm thinking I can't do it over 500 meters because it's over too quick. It's so fast. 500 meters. Cody covers 500 meters in it seems like 30 seconds. I don't know what it really is, but it's so fast. Yeah, I've got to find somewhere where I can do it over a longer distance. But you know, again, to get back to Bathsheba, and they're talking about being under the guns. Well,
Yeah, I was about to say,
yeah.
what does that mean to get under the guns? Sorry.
So the first thing is that every piece of artillery the Germans had provided for the Turks was a howitzer. And so a howitzer, I'm sure you guys know, but maybe for some of the viewers, a howitzer doesn't have a flat trajectory. A howitzer is designed that it fires its shell up in the air. You can predict exactly where it's going to land, but it goes up in the air, arcs through, and then drops on it. And of course, the howitzer is perfect for shooting over hills, shooting into buildings where you need to go over walls or over buildings. And so the German howitzers, if you're going to fire a shell up in the air for it to then come down, obviously, I'm not sure if I'm describing this very well, but there's a point where that shell can't be fired any more vertically, is to arc it round, and there's a point where that shell can no longer come close back to the gun that fired it, like a rifle.
We lost him.
Oh no, we lost it, but he was doing a great job at explaining that.
Lost it again.
Guys, if you want to know, that was what the opening, while he's getting reset, the opening we had at the very first of this video, that was the movie version of the charge at Beersheba. And I just want to say, guys, I want you to put this in mind while we're waiting for him to come back. Put this in mind. We are charging machine guns. You're back.
Am I back? Have you got me?
Yes, we got you. These horses are charging machine guns, artillery, and rifles and trenches. With the guys have rifles on their back, but basically nothing but their bayonets over huge amounts of territory. It's insane to think about. Hey, I think you're back. You're back. Can you hear it?
Can you hear us, Steve?
Can you hear us? Hello? Oh, he's
So
off.
I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
I can't hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oop. One more try.
Once again, guys, he's in Australia, so
Yeah,
we're having a
it's
little bit.
long way.
A thumb, if
Can
you
you
can
hear
hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Well, I'm very sorry. I can see you both, but I can't hear you.
Testing, testing.
Give me a minute.
2,
Perhaps
3.
talk amongst yourselves. I'll see if I can get this back.
Okay.
All right.
Let's go over comments, Snapper. 11 Bang Bang, that is Ethan. By the way, when you guys see, most of the time when you see 11 Bang Bang in the comments, that's Ethan. He says, "All sections." Sounds familiar, doesn't it, Snapper?
Oh, indeed. Indeed.
A lot of people over here are subscribing over to Steve and Trooper Cody.
Are you there?
Oh, thank God. He's got a great channel, you guys. He really did. There's
Yeah.
a lot of little knowledge that comes out of his channel that is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we'll get him back. He'll figure this out. You'll love his channel. I promise you will. It's very good. The knowledge, when you find a channel where you learn about something for so long and all you hear is everybody repeating it over and over again, you know, it is what it is. But with his channel, that is not the case. There are so many of his videos that I've watched thinking I knew the subject, and he would throw in something. It's like, bing! Oh my God, I didn't know that at all. I would say he's a master of his his study of the light cavalry, the light horsemen.
And he does horsemen all through the centuries.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you both. No.
We're back.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, look,
We're
I think
back.
what happens is I need to get completely shut down and restart. So I'm back for now. That's good.
Yeah.
Good. Your video looks great. You sound great.
Okay, bear with me. I know what happened that time. I know what happened. So just hang on 1 second.
Steven Sheets. Yeah, guys, Steven Sheets has his own channel out there. I forgot I was going to mention him. He said, "Don't forget, everyone, daylight saving time starts tomorrow. Thank you for reminding us.
Oh yeah, that's right. It
Righto.
is.
Okay, I'm back. Let's hope. Where were we? We were talking about howitzers. I don't know what happened while I was missing.
You were talking about howitzer
under the guns.
under the gun.
Righto. So if you're happy for me to keep going from there, that's what happened. A howitzer fires a shell, and it gets to a point where it can no longer keep coming back towards itself. And once the light horse reached that point, then they were safe from artillery fire. When it came to the Turkish rifles, what was found after the Beersheba was taken was that for whatever reason, nobody got the Turks to recalibrate their rifles. So if the 303, of course, has got your sights here that you can adjust those sights for huge distance, and the rifles that were found in the Turk trenches had not been recalibrated. And so when you couple the speed of the horses, the distance the horses were apart from each other, the shells stopped at one point, that accounts for the astonishing fact that only 30 soldiers died. It's something like 90 horses, but that is because wounded horses were put out of their misery, and that's why the horses were so much higher than the human. And when I say 30, that includes a few that died of wounds later, but it's just astonishing to think 30.
That is an astonishing number for that big of a
battle. Jump in here, guys, and show you what he's talking about. Ethan's out there wanting to know if I had my Caleb's Turkish Mauser here. This is a Turkish Mauser, and when they find these things, a lot of them are set about like that still.
So they never had shooting either above or below the whole time.
Well, no, they had them sighted in at such long range, but the horses came so fast, nobody had time to read.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, this is the Turkish Mauser. This is what the Anzacs were facing at Beersheba and Gallipoli. And so...
And I'm sure if anybody's ever hunted a running animal or even a human at full sprint, it's hard to hit. Anything at full sprint is hard to hit. Even coming directly at you is not as hard, but I guarantee you that they were probably swerving a little bit. I could bet they were swerving a little bit. I don't think they were that dumb. Well, even though horses are getting crazy, you don't think they were that dumb.
Well, that's a good question. Would they not have been able to swerve if they were in section?
No,
they would have rode straight on.
I think the reality is, I try to be as diplomatic as I can, but I was once on a horse that I was trying to keep back at a gate while three or four other horsemen wanted to go and head off a small bunch of cows, and those guys set off flat gallop and to go and get those cows, and they had probably only gone 50 meters, and there was no way I could control my horse anymore because herd mentality. Why is a whole bunch of horses going, and I'm expected to stay here by myself? And so he just took off, and there's an expression in the English language to take the bit between your teeth, and that is exactly what a horse does. A horse I've seen guys try to pull up a horse and rip the reins because the horse just clamps down on the bit, and you are not going to stop it because it's. And so my horse then was out of control, and I just sat there waiting because I knew what would happen. As soon as he caught up with the other horses, he'd be fine. And so, no criticism to anyone, though none of those horses would have been swerving because unless.
No. If I'm wrong, tell me, please. I'd have no problem being told I'm stupid.
If they'd have thought they were coming up to a rabbit hole or something, more than likely they would have jumped it anyway, but they might have swerved around something. But the guys would never have been trying to do that. It was just been concentrating on the flat.
So the horse would have probably just running straight out at something he was seeing in the distance.
And you have to, and I try to tell people this and they don't get it. You can train a horse and you can train a horse to subdue his fear and panic and stand. But if you have them shells and things going off around you too, that is an added element that horses generally want to, when they're nervous, they want to go. That's what they want to do. They want to go straight forward and they want to go. And I mean, I get you. Cody, if you guys haven't seen his channel, Cody is one of the best trained horses I have ever seen.
Same here. Same here.
He'll stand there and let him do a jig under his neck. My horse would have had to come apart about the time I tried to go under them reins, but that's the difference in training.
Well,
yeah, I'm extremely jealous of Cody.
It's 7 years now with that horse, so it's a bonding thing, and the thing about horses, it's never going to be quick, and if you get a fully trained horse, then you're a new owner. There's no guarantees. So anyway, won't talk horses. You get me started talking on horses, we'll be here to midnight.
we still haven't found out what happened after they got over the trenches, because the horses.
Let's go back.
That's where we left off.
Right. So basically, they got to the trenches, and they were able to pull up most of the horses, and the blokes jumped off. They went into their a lot of the times they still went into their 3 fighting, 1 holding all 4 horses. They still did that, and then the guys jumped down into the trenches and were fighting with the bayonet. But the other thing about the Bathsheba charge is that once they got there, once they actually arrived at the trenches, were climbing off their horses, the Turks surrendered. They just surrendered in droves, because it's really, I think it's hard to get morale. How important morale is in battle, and because the Australians weren't just charging, they were screaming, they were waving their bayonets, and the Turks, they used to say that the Australians were madmen, and they were one of the villages whose names escape me was protected by an enormous prickly pear wall that was 12, 14 feet high, 8 feet thick. Prickly pear had been, for centuries probably, this wall had been designed to protect this village. And when the Australians attacked it, the Australian blokes jumped off their horses, and they just started attacking the prickly pear wall with their bayonets, cutting through it. And the Turks were firing through the prickly pear at the Australians. And as soon as the Australians had hacked their way through the prickly pear and were climbing through with their bayonets, the Turks surrendered. And it's because they were farmers, conscripted and poorly trained, facing blokes who are experts in a knife fight. I mean, you can imagine if you're walking through any major city and you're confronted by some mad-looking mugger who's got this deadly sharp knife, you're not going to argue with him. You're just going to say, "Here, take the watch, take the wallet."
Right.
And so
a huge show of violence is a good thing for making people surrender, and fear is contagious on a battlefield. Somebody surrenders, a lot usually will surrender right after.
Yeah. And
let
so
me put this into what we would consider, because we talk about these things a lot on this channel. Mostly stuff we talk about is from the 1840s and 50s. This is the equivalent of hardened Texas Rangers. In my opinion, the light horse are what the Texas Rangers were in the 1840s. These are hard fighting men. They've got big knives. They've got repeating rifles, and they just don't let go, And this would be like you're sitting in a trench watching, I don't know how many of what we would picture like Texas Rangers, men who are just that hard. They've been on horses their whole life. They come from Australia. They were very well trained on horseback before they even got there. And so it would be very terrifying to be in that trench at that point.
Yeah, they fight all day for fun, and you're just a farmer. You would sit there and go, maybe I'm not going to win this, and I'll just keep my life. I don't care. Yeah.
There's another video I've made, and it's basically how the 200 Australian light horse came across 5,000 armed Turkish troops, and the Turks surrendered to them, and without a shot being fired. And what actually happened is that the 5,000 Turks were heading to. They would be a number of Am I still there? My screen went
You're
blank.
still here.
Am I
We
still
hear you.
You're still here. You're just
Okay,
broken up a little bit.
So the 5,000 Turkish armed troops are being pursued, surrounded, and pot shots picked at by Bedouin Arabs who aren't going to fight them full on, but are going to be trying to pick them off. And when the 5,000 Turks came to the 200 Australian light horse, they said, we will surrender to you, but we're too frightened if we give up our guns of what the Arabs will do to us. And so the officer in charge of the 200 light horse made this decision that he was going to not shoot on the Arabs because they were allies. Anyway, we won't get into that side of things, but he wouldn't shoot on the Arabs himself, but he would allow the Turks to keep their weapons overnight. And so what was happening is famous story about how the Turks are fully armed, 5,000 of them. They are defending themselves over the night time, and the Australian soldiers, as an Australian would do, would be walking around with his enamel mug of tea, saying, "Oh, Jono, there's a bloke over there, mate. Take him out." And so the stories that the Australians were going around encouraging the armed Turks, who were still officially their enemy. The war hasn't ended, on where some Arabs were supporting. Good shot, mate. Oh, good shot. See, blah, like that. Good on you. And what happened is when the sun came up the next day, over the horizon come a couple of thousand light horse. And then the Turkish commander says, now I feel safe. And they surrendered all their weapons to the 200 Australian light horse. And so that was the way. And this is no disrespect to the Turkish when I say this, because what I'm saying is you had highly trained guys who, what you said before, they've been in Australia where there's no water, where there's no where there's no food. What are you going to live on? Maybe a scrungy kangaroo. You manage to catch one, you kill it on the fire. You got to survive like that. And then when you're already as tough as nails, as tough as old boots, you go into a camp where some bastard sergeant is making you spend days having to fight with your knife and fist fights, and then you meet some poor farmer who's just been told, hey, you're coming off the farm, put this uniform on, get in that line, march with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So the Turks were really brave for what they did.
For what they had to do, of course. There's a big difference between a trained soldier and a farmer who has to pick up his gun and fight.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of bravery just as a farmer just standing in that line. So, yeah,
now,
of course.
You have to take this with a grain of salt, but from what I've heard over the years, documentaries, that Turkey had a terrible time after the war. The Turks and what was the Ottoman Empire had a terrible time even getting enough men together to create their own country. You know, there was such a toll that was taken on the Turks during that war, because they were brave, but they were given outdated equipment and not trained very well, as you were saying. Some of them were very well trained, of course. But to carry on, did they blow the wells?
I think it was 2 of 8. Again, historians watching will be taking notes to correct me. That's okay. Because off the top of my head, I think it was something like 2 out of 8. It was, and that's the ones that got blown. Most were saved.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those horses.
And who do we thank really for saving those wells? Who should we thank? The bloody horses. That's who we should thank, because the horses, there's no troopers going, oh, hang on, perhaps I won't stop and fight in the trench. Perhaps I'll ride into town and save the wells. That didn't happen. The horses just straight in there.
Straight to the well.
Yep. And I think the reason they didn't blow them all is they had no idea. I think they were expecting the light horse to dismount, but they had no idea how fast that was going to come down on them. Exactly. And when it came so fast.
I on that probably took less than 20 minutes for the whole thing to be over.
Like I said, it's one of the greatest stories of World War I. It's back in, if you go back and you watch the first of this video again, our intro was a movie version of that charge. I still think it's probably the greatest cavalry. We were talking about this earlier. A lot of people claim the last cavalry charge. I don't know who did it, but I would say the Wells of Beersheba have to take the cake as the best of the last cavalry charge.
Yes,
Yeah, I
there's
like-
only one more that I like to talk
Yeah.
about.
Mounted infantry. Sorry.
No, look, I think you've worded that perfectly. It's the best of the last. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The best of the last. Yep.
So where did they go from there? I mean, I've heard stories that they take Jerusalem and they have to wait for, I don't know if it's true, but that the Australians take most of the Middle East and have to wait for Lawrence of Arabia.
Well,
I don't know.
when I've been really cheeky before and said that's an upcoming video, that very story is on my list to be researched, because there are two accounts of two incidents where the Australians got to a place, and in that first instance they were told that the attack has been a failure, we are recalling the troops, and the officers in the town, Romani I think, in the town said, it hasn't been a failure, we're here, we're now, and the Turks have retreated, they've gone, and they get told, no, do again, same old story, you will do as you're told, we are retreating. So they then left that town and retreated, and the stories are that the Turks couldn't believe it, because when they counterattacked, when they came back to counterattack, they came back to an empty city, because the Australians had retreated under orders. And the other story, and I'm not sure if this is Gaza, so that's why I'm saying I should have researched. This is to be researched. But Lawrence of Arabia was supposed to be the one that led the British troops into a town, and how sad the Australians are already there, mate. We're already there, and of course they got told to get out, to hide, and let the fanfare come through. And the history books, in a lot of cases, record that Lawrence of Arabia rode in and was the first one there.
That's not a diss on Lawrence of Arabia, a great man, but he just wasn't there first, from what I understand.
Yeah.
I gotta go. We're getting down to the end of this, guys. I'm sorry I haven't been over in the comments so much, but these have been such great stories. I've been kind of glued to the camera.
I know.
But
I can't believe it's been almost 2 hours.
Snapper wanted Steve to tell a particular story that involved tanks, and I'm not sure what it was. So if you two could hash that out, I'll sit here and listen.
Please. Even though it's a really sad story in the end, it's just an amazing story.
Well, when you say it's a sad story at the end, I mean, do you really want me to go to the end of the story? Because there are some stories where I get pretty damn upset at the very end.
I agree.
But
let's keep it to the good part. And if you want, I'll tell everybody at the very end what happened. Unfortunately.
No, I'll tell the end, because I think anyway. So back prior to your day of infamy, prior to Pearl Harbor, you had the hierarchy in the American cavalry were arguing about whether or not the U.S. cavalry should keep horses or not, and some were saying you must have horses to get through dense forest and some places where vehicles can't go. And if I can touch on, that's exactly why the German army in World War II kept cavalry for places in Russia where vehicles couldn't go. So there were some of the generals saying we must keep the cavalry. The other side of the coin was saying we've got to move with the times. Look at the blitzkrieg with tanks racing in first into Poland. And so the arguing was going on until Pearl Harbor. And then once that happened, it seems that the horse brigade caved. The US cavalry was virtually totally dismantled. Horses were a thing of the past. Keep a few purely for ceremonial. Everything's going motorized. The one exception was the US cavalry in the Philippines. The US cavalry in the Philippines was the only US members of that were the officers. All of the troops and NCOs were Filipinos, volunteers. And then the Japanese landed on the Philippines. And because I haven't got my notes here, in the video I made of this, I try to pronounce the names. But the first place the Japanese landed, the cavalry, the US cavalry on their horses, fight a rearguard action that not only slows the Japanese down for a few hours, I think it's 6 hours, and that slowing the Japanese down had never been heard of before. They had never been stopped, and yet what this allowed the troops to regroup, to gather, to get their supplies, surprise attack, and to start moving back to a more defensive position. And then the cavalry retreated. The next day, at another location, the Japanese are using tanks, and the US cavalry on their horses charge those tanks, and they're in there, and they again hold up they stop the Japanese advance for a number of hours. Again, I think it's somewhere like 6 to 8 hours, men on horses, mostly armed with Colt 45 1911s. And yes, thank you. Yes. And again,
I brought her down just for the story.
They actually stop tanks in their tracks. And again, allowing people to retreat, because you've got to remember the retreat to Bantan. It's all Rantan. Oh, Bantan.
Bataan, yeah.
Yes, Bataan. Thank you. And so what happens is that those US cavalry on their horses, and again in my video I talk about the losses, because I think by the time they disengage from the tanks, they are 50% casualties. They've lost half. They disengage, they then go back to a valley that everyone has to go through to get to Bataan, to get to where the stand took place, and they allow everyone to get through, and then once they get through, they then go as well to where that stand takes place. And then, as has happened time and time again through history, those wonderful horses that did all of those actions, the first battle, the tank battle, the retreat, the stand, and then every one of them is slaughtered and butchered to be eaten because they were starving. The people were starving. So no horses survived there. All of those horses were eaten.
Mm-hmm. Very sad, but man, if that would have been a movie, that would have been an insane movie. Just, oh my God.
Sometimes you have to wonder why such a thing hasn't been made a movie, but a combination of the jungle and also people's credibility at believing horses could take on tanks.
And then all those men, they ended up on the Bataan Death March. I mean, that would have been one of the... And these were new troops. A lot of these troops had never seen combat. And then all of a sudden, you're in some of the deepest, hardest combat in the world. And doing something like that is just unbelievable.
And so, again, I'll just quickly say that anyone that's watching this, is very easy to go onto Google. And if you type in the US cavalry in the Philippines, 1940s. Some of the photos, the actual photos taken there, is just fantastic. You can see the sort of jungle conditions the cavalry were in.
Yeah,
that's men and horses. It's a shame all those horses lost their lives too, but that happens so much in history. I couldn't imagine having a horse that I was, with for a very long time, especially in some severe combat, to having to slaughter and eat it. I think that would be one of the hardest things I'd ever have to do. That'd be just like having to shoot your best friend.
Yeah. Yep. There's a couple of movies that Bone Tomahawk, Kurt Russell, I think, is in Bone Tomahawk. And there's a scene there in that where a man and his horse have such a bond that when the bad guys, if you like, come to steal the horses, the horse refuses to leave, and so they kill it. And that's a movie, but it's still very sad. And in Steve McQueen's movie, Tom Horn, you go through that movie, and that is a wonderful, wonderful scene. And
you shot my horse.
In one of those movies, in that movie, I've done a video because the scene I absolutely love is he rides up with his Winchester. So I ride up on Cody and I'm holding my Winchester. And then as I'm talking to my wife who's holding the camera, I just put my heels into Cody, and we just back. Cody just walked perfectly backwards, as I said, getting out of pistol range. So that, and then, as you said, Garrett, when that guy shoots that guy's horse, I shouldn't say this on camera, but you have got no idea what I would do to someone who
would hurt your horse.
Take it from me. Somebody hurts Cody or does something to Cody. I don't care.
Oh, I
don't
agree.
care.
And for all you walker lovers out there, that is the one time I see the horse pistol take down the horse. He has a walker in that movie. He shoots the horse with. It's ridiculous, but yeah.
And so that's why there's again, we could make a whole other session about what happened to Australia's horses, because the fact is that the biggest myth in Australia is that every trooper loved his horse so much that every trooper shot his own horse rather than have it fall into the hands of an uncaring Arab. And of course, the sad truth is that they couldn't do that, because that's like saying, I really don't want to hand in my rifle. I love it too much. I'm going to burn it. You know,
Right.
So, but that's a whole other topic. But it's horrendous. In the movie The Light Horseman, you know, the horse gets shot in the chest, and it's clearly going to be a fatal wound. And the sergeant says to the trooper, you know, Jono, do you want me to do it? And the guy says, no, I've got to do it myself. And I have watched that movie countless times. And if there was ever a way of seeing it on the DVD, what you would see is I'd watch that movie up to a certain point, and then I don't watch it, and the movie comes in, and I start watching the movie. As I have never seen that guy put his horse down.
It's just like Old Yeller, you know. It's the exact same thing. Man's best friend to some people isn't a dog; it could be a horse.
Yeah. I just wanted to go into this just a little bit because we're pretty well done with World War I. We've covered, I mean, of course, there's so much more out there, guys, on Anzacs in World War I. Talk about the drip rifle. You talk about Gallipoli. You can talk about Passchendaele, Beersheba, Gaza. Had the script. There's so much about it to study. And, I mean, like I said, I started studying World War I about 6 years ago now, and I literally got off on this rabbit hole of Anzacs. And I'm never going to find the end of it because there's so much history there. But we didn't know a lot about it until at least here in America, until the 1980s, when there was this huge push of Australian films. I believe first they had Gallipoli, and then they had my favorite, which is the miniseries Anzacs with Paul Hogan-Hoagie, and that is one of the greatest. I absolutely love that miniseries. It's on YouTube for free. It's just called Anzacs. If you guys want to go watch that, that is absolutely wonderful. And then you had the film The Light Horseman. So, Steve, what is your favorite movie out of all that era of the 80s?
I guess it's got to be The Light Horseman, because, you know, because what you guys talk about with firearms normally, if you put me on, have to put me on my short list, and didn't just say war movies. You said, what are any of your favourite movies? Well, then the Outlaw Josie Wales is right up there.
It's right up there for me too.
If I was on an island and they said, Steve, you can only take 5 movies with you that you have to watch over and over and over and over again, well, Outlaw Josie Wales would definitely be one of them. And then the fairly recent movie called Hostiles. I like that movie as well. That is just, I must have watched that at least a dozen times, because the attention to detail, from my perspective, how I look at how the saddles are rigged up and the bedding's rigged up and all of that stuff, it seems to me they've gone to an inordinate trouble with the attention to detail. But out of all the Australian war movies, and there's been a lot, Odd Angry Shot, Kokoda, we've made a lot of movies about the war, but it has to be for me The Light Horseman, because the era when it was made was an era when they could make a call for people to go and be in that movie, and they could say to those people, we want you to be in this movie, but you're going to have to bring your own horse. And we're not actually going to pay you to do this. You're going to come all the way here with your horse. You're going to transport your horse here, and then you're going to be in this movie. So on my Facebook page, I'm friends with 3 blokes who were actually in that movie, and they just did it for the love and the prestige, and they wanted to do it, and they really, really tried hard to make it authentic as possible. And so there's some things, if you really wanted to nitpick, there are some things like Tony Bonner, one of the officers, when he leads the charge. I don't know if you can see this, but when he's on his horse, he gives the signal like that. We're off to the side, the flat palm out. Well, that is the British cavalry signal for a charge, and that's because the Australian Army, the handbook says you never, the light horse, you never gallop. So there was no signal
no charge then, really, right?
But that is chronic nitpicking to say that, you know. And so
that's what we do on this channel.
Yes.
So Tony Bonner, who played that role absolutely brilliantly, he is still alive. He is still a fan of the movie. He's still a huge fan of the light horse. He kept all of his props and stuff that he had given to him for making the movie. He's donated that to one of the light horse museums. And so it's certainly not a criticism of a fabulous actor or a fabulous movie. But because the other thing, of course, is if you watch the movie, you don't see them riding in artillery formation, because how boring would it be if those horses were all 20 or 30 meters apart? You want to see that fabulous bunched up charge, but it's still a fabulous movie that gets across the message pretty well.
One that I'm not real fond of, and I don't know what your take of it is, but the more recent is a post-war movie, The Water Diviner. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yes.
It's not bad. It's not one of my favorites. What is your take on that? Just, it's not controversial.
No, there's no bad take on it, because I'm so pleased you mentioned this, because when this movie was in post-production, they put a call out for anyone who had light horse uniforms, anyone that was a light horse reenactor. They put a call out for those people to send their details through, and you could perhaps be an extra in the movie. And so I'm 70 now, but at the time I was obviously in my 60s, and I had my uniform, and I sent my information away, and I'm still waiting for a reply.
I wouldn't say it's not a bad movie. It's just so dark. It feels pretty hopeless through the whole thing, is my take on it.
I think it's great you say it's dark, because if you look at it, you are looking at the truth. You are looking at a situation where young men go, woohoo, let's go. This will be so exciting. I am sick to death of being on this boring farm. No TV, no radio, nothing to do except get up at sunrise, work for Dad, go to bed at sunset, get up the next day, work for Dad, work the farm. Here's a great chance. Whoa, we'll go off for adventure. Take our horses, get a gun. We're going to have a fantastic adventure. What happens is all of the kids go, the 3 boys go off together. We're going to stay together, which they tried to keep people together. So they go off together. They go to Gallipoli. What happens back home is that Dad is torn in half, because half of him, as a dad, is saying, I'm so proud of my 3 boys who are men. I'm so proud. But half of me is crippled and broken emotionally inside because my boys might die. Then you've got his wife, who is a complete emotional write-off, that then commits suicide. Then you find out all 3 boys are sent to Gallipoli together. When they get there, that we've talked about the neck, mass machine gunning. The 3 boys are lying there one of them screaming in agony all night, screaming to his brother, "If you love me, kill me. If you love me, kill me." So this brother shoots his own brother in the head like you would a horse or a dog, because it's the kind thing to do. But what does that do to you in the head? And then, and so when you say it's a dark movie, it's a horrendous movie, but it's surely it's the sort of stuff we have to see to appreciate what that true horror was on a far greater scale. Even when Dad, whatever you think of the dad finding the son, the reality is when he finds his son is mentally shattered. Why wouldn't he be? How he has to be. And then let's think of the redemption at the end, that at least Dad and one son get back together again. And of course, there's horse riding in the movies. There's horses, and so again, that appeals to me.
And I can tell you why I don't get into such things very often on here, but that movie has a spot in my heart for me. I don't particularly like it, but it's not because it's a bad movie. I sit down, my brothers and I are inseparable. You've seen us on this channel. Well, most of you have. Ethan, Caleb, and I. And we've always, and there's other brothers too, but we were the three that were always together. And we're pretty inseparable. And we sit down and watch that movie. And it was like, at the very beginning, it was like, this felt like us. And then it was a month later, you know, my brother was fighting in Syria, fighting a war. And it was I could not watch that movie again for the fear and the, you know, just the things that go through your emotion wise. But yes, it is a good movie. But like I said, it to me is a very dark thing. Yeah. But on to happier subjects.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. One last thing on that, though, is really, really bad wars happen when people who remember them have passed away. Yeah. And that's why really, really bad wars happen, because there's no real personal memory left that much. Yeah. And so people always glorify war as being some courageous, great thing. And in real life, it's nothing but fear and murder all day long.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it. So that's why it's kind of good to have that kind of stuff, because people who haven't experienced it at least get a feel for why war is so bad. Yeah. And it's just unnecessary and stupid.
Yeah.
But it happens still. But yeah, back to good, better things.
Yeah. I have some people in the chat wanting to know, Steve, if you can recommend any books to them on the World War I Anzacs.
Yeah, I would say Gallipoli. It's just straight out called Gallipoli. And I should be shot for getting the name of the author. So Bill the Bastard. I'm not sure what's going to be available in America, but anyway, so the book is simply called Bill the Bastard. That is the story of that horse I talked about. And Gallipoli will give you the very best breakdown, detail for detail, about what happened with all of the troops, with Churchill's planning, Kitchener changing it. So that's a really good one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that there's only the two that instantly come to mind.
Well, you guys, if you go watch his videos, I'm sure he can put some out in his videos to give you that information.
Well, actually, if you wouldn't mind saying that, the thing that I have found is so many people ask me questions on my YouTube channel that then gives me a chance to research and answer them. And sometimes those questions have resulted in fantastic videos. And of course, the one that instantly comes to my mind is one guy asked me, what did the Australian soldiers do for toilet paper? And so that silly comment, but not really silly, because that thing resulted in the video all about there was no toilet paper. Most of the time they didn't wear underpants. The disease was rampant. They couldn't wash their hands when they'd been to the toilet. And so that resulted in a fantastic video about disease, simply from asking me about toilet paper. And another person asked me what was an Australian soldier paid, which resulted in a video of everyone's pay. Canadians pay, the doughboys pay, Germans pay, French pay. send me a question on YouTube and I'll be happy to answer, probably in more detail than they want.
All right, guys, I think we just hit 2 hours and 10 minutes. It feels like it's been about 30 minutes, but I have never
right?
I have never been so sat here in front of this camera and just been so enthralled to hear these stories. It's good for us to move out of our comfort zone, which most of us is the American West or the Revolutionary War, because there is such a huge world of history out there. And I want to get into this more because I know we're going to be having Steve more often, because I would love to go back and talk about the Visigoths.
Oh, me too. Oh, that was so good.
Some more ancient history, but and I believe he can about answer what you got questions in horse soldier history. Let's put it that way. You have any? You've told us a lot about the videos that you have coming. What's your next video you have coming out, or can you tell us?
No, I think the next couple is going to be Waltzing Matilda and why it can't be a national anthem, and then there's a few that are planned at the moment. I'm overdue to do instructional videos about the light horse equipment, because it's good to reenact, but some people do it very wrong. And the sad part about that is that then people assume what they're doing wrong is how it was done. And, and a real quick example is there's a video on YouTube, and I'm just going to have to say this. There's a video on YouTube that says, how do you stop your light horse neck rope? So the neck rope is a hemp rope that goes from the jowl piece of the horse's reins and goes around his neck with a ring of loops on it. And basically that was designed so that when you took the reins and the headgear off, you still had a halter with a lead rope, a tether rope attached. And so when they make this loop, the guy made a video saying, here's how you stop the neck rope sliding down when your horse drops its head. You get a plastic wire tie and loop the neck rope to your saddle. And it's a plastic wire tie. And when you read the 1914 handbook, it tells you exactly how to do it. 8 inches from the hook to the knot, and then it's done around the neck tight enough not to strangle the horse, but when the horse puts its head down, it shouldn't slide down. And time and time again, you see people with this great loop hanging down. So I'm due to make a few instructional videos, but
cool.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Don't get Snapper started on false information echo chambers.
Yep.
Yeah. But all right, so guys, we're gonna head on out of here. Where can they find you at, Steve? What's the name of your channel?
Trooper Codys Light Horse History.
There you go. So all you people that I said Trooper Cody and Steve, I was wrong.
No. Hopefully Trooper Cody Light Horse, and they'll find it.
Yeah. Okay. Snapper, what you got coming up? I guess we asked you that last week.
Yeah, I got a video coming out. Should be tomorrow, maybe the next day, depending on how I feel. I'm super duper sick since I woke up today. But there's a lot coming out. A lot coming out over here. So just be patient, please.
Good to see. Good to see. Look forward to it.
And on our channel, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Snapper.
Oh no, you're good. All I just wanted to do is also thank Steve for Steve found me, and I saw his, and his little icon just intrigued me. So I clicked on it and I went through his videos, and it was one of those things that I was instantly a fan. I mean, I just went through all his videos, and I was telling Garrett about it. I was like, you got to check this out. You're really going to like this guy.
The first video
I'm just glad that we were able to put this together. Yeah. I'm really glad we got to put this together and it finally worked out, even though last week we had the problems. But like I said, he's halfway around the world. So I'm just tickled pink that this actually got to happen.
Me too. Guys. It's fantastic. Fabulous.
You can thank Snapper. He walked us through all the technical stuff that neither of the rest of us know how to handle.
Well, I told you I wanted to make this happen, and I knew it was not going to be the easiest. I didn't figure it'd be as hard as it was, but I wanted this to happen so much because I figured everybody would want to see this, and plus it would help Steve out, everybody getting to recognize his channel, because it's really worth its weight in gold. It truly is.
Really, I think what I've got to say is that I appreciate the both of you, because it would have been very easy to say this is all too hard. Here's this old man that has no idea how technology works. Let's just forget it. But you persisted, and I really appreciate that, because that's
I'm
great.
just glad you didn't give up on us. That's all.
It was well worth it. We've just sat through 2 hours of stories that we're never going to hear anywhere else, and it's very. We have had a huge. We have had
2 hours,
huge
19 minutes right now. 2 hours, 20 minutes, basically. I felt like we've only been on for an hour max.
Yeah,
we've had upwards. We've had upwards of 30 people in here, which is really big for this. Most of the time, we're down at 16 right now, guys. If you want to tune into 11 Bang Bang in the morning, we will be revisiting the Cimarron Thunderer. I have one more thing here before we leave, and I'm just gonna go ahead and we'll say bye, and then we'll mute out. But I'm going to add here, if it works, one of my absolute favorite songs of all time that has to do with the Anzacs, and I hope you guys enjoy it. If you're watching this live on YouTube later, I'll probably take it down because it might get a copyright claim on it. But if you're watching it live right now, just stay tuned through this closing. And I want to thank Steve, and I want to thank Snapper, and trust in God, everybody. Keep your powder dry.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Ride safe.
We do not know this Australian's name, and we never will. We do not know his rank or his battalion. He may have been one of those who believed the Great War would be an adventure too grand to miss. He may have felt that he would never live down the shame of not going. The unknown soldier honours the memory of all those men and women who laid down their lives for Australia. We've lost more than 100,000 lives, but we've gained a legend and a deeper understanding of what it means to be Australian.
He's a drover drifting over western plains.
He's a city lad, a clock down Flinders Lane.
They're in the trenches at Lone Pine and on the Flanders firing line. A willing band of ordinary men.
He's all of them, he's one of us, born beneath the Southern Cross. Side by side, we say with pride, he is all of them, and he is one of us. He's a pilot on a midnight bombing raid. He's an able seaman on the Armadale.
She's a nurse in Vietnam. They're on patrol in Oriscam.
Sons and daughters rise into the call. She's all of them, she's one of us, born beneath the Southern Cross. Side by side, we say with pride, she is all of them, she is all of them, she is one of us.
The spirit of the Anzacs,
Proud and strong, the spirit of the Anzacs will live on and on and on. He's all of them, he's one